Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. And if you are just tuning in with me for the very first time, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm really glad you're here with me today. I am your host, Heather Carey, nutritionist, chef, mom, and a woman who has been around the block with food. I want to open up about real food in relation to health, weight, and our bodies so you can make peace with what you eat. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Real Food Stories podcast. Today, I am with Jessica Setnick, who is a registered dietitian and is known by eating disorder professionals worldwide for bringing a new vision of eating disorder care to the field. Through her training workshops, eating disorder boot camp, and hundreds of conference and community presentations, Jessica has spread her message to thousands of healthcare professionals, educators, college students, and other individuals. Combining authenticity, 2 decades of expertise, and her unique ability to translate complicated topics into practical tools, Jessica connects with audiences on a deep level, whether from a podium or across cyberspace. So happy to welcome Jessica to the podcast today. Hi, Jessica. How are you?
Jill, I'm sort of cringing at that dry bio. I wish I had given you something more interesting about myself, but we'll prove that I'm well beyond the bio as we talk.
I'm sure that you can speak to many, many people about eating disorder issues because I know that it's so incredibly prevalent. And I know that we talked off air about the people who I see and who my audience is here, and that's mostly women in midlife. So I would love to talk to you today about what you see in this age group as far as eating issues and how we can help women finally make peace with their bodies, because it is such a challenge at this age. You see on the internet the fear marketing around getting older, gaining weight, not being able to lose weight, needing to balance hormones or take weird supplements to boost metabolism. And I think all these messages just foster a lot of paranoia in women and just send out a message that they are not good enough, that they need to be skinnier, that they need to be just for their age, for the just better looking as we get older. And it's just a battle. So I think we are just in a almost in a losing battle with getting, with aging and then having this pressure to lose weight, which I think can stir up some old eating issues and disordered eating. So what do you think?
Well, I have so many thoughts about what you're saying. I absolutely agree that all eating issues, well, I won't say all because there's exceptions to everything, but most eating issues are pediatric. They started a long time ago, even before we were born, right? And so as soon as you're born, you don't get your needs met immediately. You have to cry for food. And so there's someone, or you at least have to have someone who's responsive to you. And so any of that person's hangups about food get instantly and automatically translated down to us. On top of that, the feeding process is part of how we develop self-esteem. So if it's disrupted in any way, there's just so many things that can go wrong. And one thing that most people never even think about is that food is a mood altering substance. And we think about drugs or alcohol as mood altering, but food is mood altering. Anyone who's ever gotten hangry and then ate something and suddenly doesn't hate their husband anymore, whatever the case may be, knows that food is mood altering, but we don't think of it that way. And so there's so many ways that we use food that are a problem. But I think that you can't place everything on an individual. I am in your target audience. I am 51 years old. I think that aging is the new weight loss. I agree with everything you said about all those products that are always being marketed to us. And if you think about the fact that if we all just accepted ourselves right now as is, like snap of the fingers, everyone now accepts themselves, think about how many industries would crumble. We kind of saw it during COVID, right? That there were people who weren't shaving their legs anymore. There's so many things that that rely on us feeling like there's something wrong with our bodies. It's part of our culture, our capitalism aspect of our culture. And there's that's what advertising is meant to do, is evoke an emotion in us that we already have. Advertising doesn't teach us new things. Advertising evokes an emotion that we already have. And so that feeling of us not being good enough is already there. And then it's really preyed upon. And I feel like the best example of how it works, or I don't want to say works, how it manipulates us is, I read somewhere yesterday that Oprah Winfrey has um, decided to take weight loss drugs. And the fact that she, with all her accomplishments and all the barriers that she's overcome, still feels that her weight is her biggest accomplishment. I mean, she's been dealing with this, as long as we've seen her in the public eye. And I don't think that anyone else really cares what size Oprah is. We all either admire her for the things we admire her for, or dislike her for the things we dislike her for. But I really don't think anyone cares about her weight. It's more of a news topic because it's important to her. And so if you think about someone with every resource in the world, that person is not able to change her body type from its natural state long term sustainably. That's what I think we should recognize. Now, the problem with midlife is our bodies start to change. And so we feel like, oh no, this isn't my normal body type. I need to get it back to that other body type because that's my normal body type. But it's really like a second puberty. Think about your kids, if you have kids or kids in your life, if you have watched anyone go through that big growth spurt and body changes, we wouldn't tell them, no, you have to go back to the size that you were when you were 8. But that's what we're trying to do to ourselves. And it's an imagined, sort of manipulated phenomenon that I think is sold to us for the purpose of selling us things. And it's really sad that we're not allowed to just age gracefully. But I remember that commercial being a kid. I don't intend to age gracefully. I intend to fight it every step of the way. I mean, that is what we're dealing with now. We're in that situation where we feel like we have to fight to maintain the status quo that we've had, during maybe our 30s, 40s. And I think it's really hard to accept that bodies change throughout life and will continue to. It's really tough. And I know that because I'm experiencing it myself.
Yeah, I am too. I'm in my mid 50s right now, and definitely my body is shifting and changing, and it's I'm recognizing it and just trying to sort of flow with it and not get alarmed by it. But it can cause a lot of fear in a lot of women. I wanted to talk to you about Ozempic. That was one of my questions that I
Sure.
was going to address, but you just brought it up. And the fact that Oprah has come out and said that she has lost a lot of weight because she's been taking weight loss drugs. And the curious thing for me with Ozempic, and I understand the need if you are very, very overweight and, for health reasons, right? There is a health component, right, that we want to address, I think, in relationship to weight, but not when it's just like 20 pounds, right? It's, what I'm talking about, like when you have a
Yeah,
lot
well,
of weight
the
to
the
lose.
research shows that people who are, and I don't really care for the word overweight because it's like, over what weight? It's over some random standard weight. But that first group of individuals who are over that random standard weight are actually healthier than people who are underweight. So it's one of those things where we have been sold this myth that weight is the defining factor in health and affects all these other things. And it does affect some things. It affects mobility in some cases, right? There's things that weight does affect, but we've been sold a bill of goods about how weight is the most important factor in health. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. I know I'll retract my my statement, but I think my point is that I have yet to hear anyone say I'm taking Ozempic because I'm concerned about my weight in relationship to my health. It's I've the only thing I have heard is I am taking Ozempic because skinny just feels better to me. It's
Oh, uh-huh.
and it's the other, like, I've never heard that from Oprah. I've never heard that also, like, that she was concerned about that, but it just but that she wanted to lose weight to stop the struggle in her head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I know many women now who just have about 20 pounds to lose who are taking Ozempic.
Wow.
So what do you feel like is going to become the result of this drug
Well,
and
I don't want to
relationships with eating
speculate. I
disorders
don't
or
want to
weight loss?
speculate, and I also don't want to judge any individual for doing what they are doing in their life because they're making choices, and I believe in autonomy. But I can tell you what I feel about what has led to someone who feels that they have 20 pounds to lose. So there's already a myth that they have 20 pounds to lose. And then the myth that if they lose weight, they'll feel better, right? There's so many myths that lead up to someone who is a normal weight wanting to take a weight loss drug. And that's, I think, what we as a society need to change, but it's on an individual basis. And so to me, it sounds really, really hard to just say I accept my body as is, right? Much less I love my body. I mean, I don't know anyone who stands in front of the mirror every morning and says I love my body. Like, no, that's sort of an impossible goal, I think, to achieve. But I think that curiosity is a great stepping stone toward hopefully someday acceptance. I think appreciation is a good stepping stone too. So if instead of my body is wrong, my body makes me feel bad, if instead we just had curiosity, that's interesting. I'm tempted to take a weight loss drug. I wonder what that's about. Or appreciation. I'm so appreciative of all the changes my body's going through that I don't even need to know about. It's so weird to think about that you have your lungs breathing all the time without you having to think about it, and your heart beating all the time without having to think about it, and your hair grows all the time without you having to think about it. And isn't it possible that our body shape is changing not for some nefarious reason, but simply because that's the process that we're going through? And can we appreciate that as much as we appreciate, thank goodness my hair grows without me having to think about it every minute of every day, you know? So I think curiosity and appreciation, if we had been raised with that instead of dislike, disdain, and control, we wouldn't be in a place where someone who, you know, and I have heard many more people because I work, I guess, in this field, say that they want to lose weight for health reasons, but they're in the same boat as the friends that you're talking about who really are not in experiencing health related complications of their weight, but it's still that storyline in their mind that we've been raised with. And again, I don't blame any individual. We're all swimming in the same pool of, basically diet culture and untruths. But whether it's for the pseudo health or whether it's simply for losing weight, I actually think that um, I admire someone who just says, "Yes, I'm doing it to lose weight," and doesn't have the sort of cloud of, faux healthism, because at least it's honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that you can, I hear that, you can hear people say, like, I'm losing weight for my health, but
Hmm.
there might be, right, underlying other, they
Yeah,
want to lose weight because losing weight is more accepted.
yeah.
Being
Yeah, and
skinny is more
acceptance really
accepted.
starts with yourself, but like I said, you can't it's really hard to say, for example, um, I would really be more comfortable just wearing my bathrobe to the grocery store, right? If we all fully accepted ourselves, there's like you said, there's social pressure out there that says, wait, this is not the right way to go to the grocery store. But then sometimes we'll see someone doing something that's out of sort of the social norm, and we really admire that person. And what comes to mind right now is I once heard a psychiatrist speak on addiction, and he gave this really normal talk about, his experiences with alcoholism and put in his, medical knowledge, la la la. And then at the end, he played the harmonica. Okay. That's weird, right? You don't expect that in a professional lecture, but I remember it 20 years later and to tell you about it because I just thought, wow, that's bold. Right. And so we sometimes admire people who step outside the norm, someone like, let's say, a Judy Dench, who's aging naturally or something like that, but we don't have the confidence to emulate that because we feel the social pressure. And so that's how I know it's fictitious, is because there are people who are exceptions, and I can hear the thoughts of the people listening to us saying, but I'm not Judy Dench, so she can get away with that. Helen Mirren can get away with, gray hair, but I can't pull off gray hair. And again, that's just a storyline that we tell ourselves. And here I am with highlights in my hair because I'm trying to gently transition myself from, weird. No, I shouldn't say weird. To me, it's weird because I've always had brown hair. So now suddenly I have, these gray Dr. Seuss hairs popping out. And so, highlighting them is sort of my transition to gray, but I totally get it. Like, well, Helen Mirren, yeah, she looks great with silver hair, but I wouldn't, type of thing. It's so easy to do that stuff to ourselves when really we need to remember it's not true. It's social pressure. And that's where the curiosity piece comes in. I wonder where I got this idea that gray hair isn't okay. I may still color my hair, but to just be curious instead of thinking gray hair is bad, thinking, I wonder where I got this idea that gray hair is bad. In other words, thinking of it as an idea instead of a fact is already a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, to do something out of the norm is very brave, and it's also really risky because you are then going against the
Hmm.
majority of women, and
Hmm.
the pressure is real. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know,
Absolutely.
can we
Yes.
thank social media for that, the internet? I mean,
No, this has been going on a long
oh
time.
yeah. Oh no, this has been going on for years and years, but I think
Yeah.
now, especially with the 24/7 social media cycle, you all you do is go on Instagram. And because I'm of my age, I mean, they know me really well, right? And suddenly, all the menopause diets, supplements, hormone balancing, anti-aging, makeup, cosmetics, just to get myself to look younger. But I agree with you that I think that this absolutely starts in childhood, right? We are fed messages. We have to clean our plates. I mean, we lose our what it feels like to be hungry and full enough and to
Hmm.
stop, right? And we get all sorts of messages from our parents and and family, right? And so then
Hmm.
that just rolls into we're not good enough.
Yeah. And I want to insert another thought about social media because I do think there is a plus to social media. And maybe I'm the only person on earth who is in this profession that thinks there's a benefit to social media, but it helps us see people who are different from our peer group and different from the people that we see all the time. So I will say that I have seen people on social media, for example, who are luxuriating in their gray hair, right? People who take pride in their beautiful gray hair. And I don't know anyone in my life personally that does that. So there's a different point of view for me to see that I don't see in my daily life. I have seen people on social media who, and this is the term that they prefer to use for themselves, are super fat and they're exercising. They're doing exercises in a chair, even if they can't jog. They are putting on beautiful clothes and beautiful makeup and enjoying their day. I have seen people that the world would consider obese tumbling, right? Doing gymnastics, dancing with style and grace. And I don't know people in my life that I would see on a daily basis doing those things. And so to me, there is a plus to social media, which is that we can, and it's hard because you have to kind of fight the algorithms, right? You have to sometimes seek these things out. But every once in a while, there's someone who, has a viral video, and then I'll follow them. I'll choose to follow someone who breaks the mold because it's a reminder that if there's one person on social media doing that, there's thousands of people out there doing that. The world is not the little cookie cutter place of my, let's say, neighborhood or friend group.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, but that also feels a little like, well, like Helen Mirren is doing. She can, you know, go
Yeah.
gray, and but I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
It feels
Yeah.
risky, right?
Yeah.
So you see those
Absolutely. But
people.
again, it's putting those ideas into our mind. It's countering the messages. So I'm not saying that one one large person doing gymnastics is going to make us think, oh, I don't need to lose weight. Like it's not that like 1-to-1 ratio like that, but it is anything that pops a little hole in the bubble that we live in is a step in the right direction. It's reminding us that these myths that we've heard are not true. Gray hair, you can't be pretty with gray hair. I mean, remember the old, so old, but men don't make passes at girls who wear glasses. And we're both wearing glasses right now, right? So somehow we have managed to sway the trend toward it's cool to wear glasses, right? I don't know, maybe in 10 years it's cool to have gray hair. Actually, there was a trend maybe like 4 or 5 years ago where it was like light purple, light blue hair, but it was almost silvery gray, right? So it is possible to change these things, right? But it's not a fast process at all.
Yeah, no, I think it is very possible. And I think that's the women that I work with. I mean, that's my goal is to help women make peace with food and eating and cooking, getting into your kitchen, being comfortable
I
with
love all that.
food. And but it's a process. A lot of the women that I see in cooking classes, they have a lot of fear around food,
Hmm.
which around cooking, about being even good enough to cook a good meal, for their
Hmm.
family. And
Hmm.
I mean, the layers go deep, and I think the layers
Yes.
start in childhood.
Well, let me tell you about a study that some savvy dietitians did probably 20 years ago. They took 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and they gave them all on 3 different days, 3 different size plates of macaroni and cheese. So one day it was a small plate with a small amount. One day it was a medium plate with a medium amount. One day it was a bigger plate with a bigger amount. And they mixed it up. It wasn't like a progression like that of small, medium, large. They just mixed it up. What they found was that no matter what size plate you gave a 3-year-old, they ate what they wanted, left over the rest, and went to play. The 5-year-olds ate a different amount depending on the size of the portion you gave them. And so, what we learn from that is somewhere between 3 and 5, we stop listening to our internal cues that guide us and we start looking at external cues, even if that external cue is as simple as the size of the plate. So we want to try to get back to that. We're not trying to convert into a new person. We're trying to get back in time to that 3-year-old that says, I'm hungry, even if it's half an hour before dinner, and doesn't care if you say dinner's in 30 minutes. They're hungry now. And how would our lives be different if when we were kids and we said 30 minutes before dinner, I'm hungry? And by the way, at some point we stop even asking because we know what the answer is going to be. But if we felt totally confident saying, hey, I'm hungry now, and the person who was caring for us said, okay, well, dinner's in 30 minutes. What do you think you could eat that would tide you until then? Do you think maybe half a turkey sandwich would be a good choice, or crackers and cheese, or right? And if you ate it and then you weren't hungry for dinner, they would say, that's okay. You had a big snack before dinner. And the next time you said, I'm hungry and it's 30 minutes before dinner, they would say, okay, well, let's think about this. Last time you were hungry before dinner, you ate cheese and crackers and you weren't hungry when it came to be dinner time. So what if we just do crackers and then see how that goes? And if they had taught us to experience and experiment with our own hunger cues rather than saying dinner's in 30 minutes, so you just need to wait, what if you had to go to the bathroom, right? Oh, well, toilet time is in 30 minutes. You just have to wait. I mean, probably some people were raised like that, but we can easily see that there is a point where your natural body functions are going to overcome any of those restrictions. And that's where, you find out as a kid, like, oh, nobody's home. I can sneak some more crackers or something like that if you don't know that you're going to get fed when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great study, and I think that would be the dream, right? That children have parents who grew up as healthy eaters, and then they're passing down these really good behaviors to them. But it's the parents that, right, intervene and then throw in all the messages about food is good, food is
Well,
bad, you're
and
hungry, you're not hungry.
remember, no one who is listening is immune in the sense that all of us, every single one of us has either a parent or grandparent, maybe it goes far back as a great grandparent who was a refugee, who was an immigrant to a new country, who was impoverished, who had food insecurity, who lived through a war situation. right? So the people who cared for us came about it honestly, right? They're not trying to screw us up, right? They had a different situation, but they failed to see that we're no longer in that situation. And just as a tiny example, I remember that my uncle Stanley, he was in World War II, and he was in, maybe was it North Africa, and they didn't have enough water. And every night he had to go to sleep with a glass of water by his bed. He usually didn't even drink it. He just needed to know it was there, right? And so those things are lifelong and lasting. When we have traumatic events with food, in his case, it was with water, but same thing. Those things are life lasting. And so if we were raised by someone who has that kind of experience in their past, it's not surprising that they pass it on to us because it's part of them. So I just want to let parents off the hook and just make sure we're not, saying everyone's parents screwed them up and that's the problem. It's that people do things out of love, right? Because they want us to have a good life and they want us to fit into society and they don't want us to wear bathrobes to the grocery store and be looked at as weird. And so it's in love that we have some of those ideas. Now, advertising and capitalism, I'm not going to say they love us. They just want to exploit us and take our money. But parents, I hope most parents are doing things out of love and out of the way that they were raised. And what's hard is you can grow up thinking, I'm never going to do this to my kids. But if you don't know what the other options are, you end up replaying the same story.
That's really true. And I agree with you that I think that parents do come with their own histories that they've gotten from their parents and on and on. And there's all sorts of messages about clean your plate. They're starving kids in Africa, whatever
Oh,
we
yeah.
grew
Fill in
up
the
with.
blank country. Yeah.
Yeah, you cannot leave any food on your plate, or you're not allowed to have dessert unless you do this. I mean, there's a million of those messages. But then how do you not pass this on? I mean, how do you then learn to become a mindful eater, where you are listening to your hunger and your fullness and your satiety, and you're allowing your kids to do that without fear of them being hungry or getting too full, or they're going to gain weight, or they're going to mess up their dinner, or all of
Well, let
that.
me say the first step is accepting that all of those things are going to happen to your kids. And that's part of the experience. It's sometimes overeating, sometimes undereating, sometimes eating things you don't love, sometimes having the same thing 2 nights in a row because you love it so much, right? All of those things are going to happen. And we need to be much more accepting of those experiences. And it's really hard because of that feeling that something's going to go wrong, and you never turn off that worry switch once it turns on for a parent. I can give a couple of suggestions. One is that if you think about kids eating is not a matter of one meal or even one day, it's over time. So if you went to see a dietitian and said, do you think my kid's eating is okay, they're not going to say, what did they eat yesterday? Right? It's going to be more of a long term. What are the kind of things that they like? What do they tend to do? Because health is so much more about trends than it is about any one thing. Now, I'll make an exception if they're like eating marbles. Yeah, no, that's bad. But as far as food goes, it all goes down the pike, and your body sees it as nutrients and not as even individual food. So we put a lot of preoccupation on what our kids eat that maybe isn't necessary. But the part that's really hard is us identifying the stuff that isn't real from the stuff that is real, because in our minds, it's all truth, right? And so I put together a workbook called Food Fairy Tales because I want us to talk about these things as myths or fairy tales or stories or whatever you want to call it, but something that helps you realize that you have heard these stories, but you don't have to believe them anymore. And so instead of sort of shaming yourself for having these thoughts, recognize where they came from and then decide, which of these do I want to keep? So, just as an example, maybe your parent said, oh, no, you can't wear white shoes until after Labor Day. And you heard that, and you get to decide if you want to do it or not. And there may be pangs in your head when you wear white shoes before Labor Day and you're like, oh, should I be doing this? But then you go to a party and you realize everyone's wearing white shoes, or someone else, someone you admire is wearing white shoes, and you realize it's okay. So that's what I want us to do with these food fairy tales, is think of it as, ooh, it's really hard for me to let my kids leave food over on the plate that I know is going in the compost pile. But you know what? That was just a story I was told. Yes, there were children starving in Africa, but you know what? If this was really about starving children, there's probably hungry kids across the street. You don't have to go further than your own neighborhood to find food insecure people, right? So that's where I feel like we are really trying to go, is to recognize these are thoughts, these are stories we were told. And so if you can do that on your own, that's fine. The workbook walks you through it. And then the other option is to actually talk with a dietitian. And I'm personally in favor of eating disorder dietitians, even if you don't feel like you have an eating disorder, because eating disorder dietitians are the ones who are trained to investigate and help you figure out what it is that you are, what are the roots of your behavior. And then there's one more thing. If someone's interested in a book, there are quite a lot of books about this. Intuitive eating comes to mind, Nourish comes to mind. Those are the ones that I think are probably most targeted toward adults. But interestingly, books like Born to Eat, which are about child feeding, are actually very interesting for an adult to read, not necessarily towards their kids. Your kids might be teens and you're not, in charge of their food anymore. But to think about how you were raised with food and how different it may be from what is considered to be a healthy way of raising kids with food. And that's when you start to be able to separate, oh, these are the stories I was told from this is real.
Those are great resources. And um, so so we're talking about a lot of focus on how to get parents to help their children not
Right.
pass on eating issues.
But
But
also, we were all children. So that's why the same resources for parents helping children are also helpful for adult women helping ourselves to sort of reparent, re raise ourselves with a healthy relationship with food.
totally true. I absolutely agree with that. But a lot of women, the focus is on helping my kids, right? It's
Yeah.
them first. Now,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, in midlife, they're empty nesters. I know my kids don't live at home with me anymore. I'm not responsible for cooking for
Right.
them and like making sure that they're nourished and everything. And now now the focus is on themselves.
Hmm.
And what do you feel about eating disorder or disordered eating
Hmm.
now in midlife with like this empty nesting? Because that's been my experience
Hmm.
with some of my clients, is that things, maybe they're so focused on their kids and now they've got to focus,
Hmm.
and then there's the aging, and I want to look good, and on and on. And
Yeah.
things can
So you
bubble up
have
to the
a
surface.
confluence of several things. One is transitions are hard, period. Whether they are good, positive transitions, whether they are things you wanted, even if they're things you initiated, transitions are hard, period. Menopause is a transition. Empty nesting is a transition. Aging is a transition, right? So we've got this perfect storm of different transitions. And then, oh, and by the way, if you are in a significant relationship, the transition of your relationship centering around kids and logistics and things like that is in transition too when you're empty nesting. Also, self care is hard. Putting ourselves first is hard. There was a study done once that showed that if doctors told women they needed to walk for their health, nobody did it. But if they said, Grandpa Joe needs to take a walk every day, they would go. They would take a walk because Grandpa Joe needed them to take a walk with him, right? And so self care is hard. So you have the transitions are hard, plus self care is hard. And think about how nourishing yourself for yourself is hard when you've been told all your life that whatever it is you want to eat is somehow wrong. And so instead of saying, like, yeah, it really sounds good to order in Thai 3 nights in a row, we think, I can't have the same food 3 nights in a row. I would never feed my kids the same food 3 nights in a row, right? So everything goes through that screening process, and we end up really out of touch with what our needs are. So how can I take self-care, 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 take a bubble bath, light candles? You know what? Taking a bubble bath with candles makes me stress out about the candles falling in the tub. Like that is not a relaxing thing for me, right? We have to figure out what self-care is for each of us. For some people, self-care is getting together with a friend. For some people, self-care is being alone with a book. And P.S., sometimes self-care is different things for the same person at different times. So all this is really different for women in this stage of life. And so it makes sense that we would be mixed up and confused. Now, I will tell you, I think that therapy with the right counselor is a great source of support. And I know that there are people listening who think, oh, therapy, that's for crazy people or whatever. But I read this in Oprah's magazine once. Therapy is not for certain people, it's for certain situations. And transitions are one of those situations. So having another person's perspective can really help you get out of your head. And in lieu of having someone to talk to, people sometimes turn to our favorite club, which is weight loss. And my perfect example is that my mom, who knows what I do and is, has fluctuated probably within the same 10 pounds her whole life, after my stepdad died, she started going to Weight Watchers. And I told her, you do you. Like, I'm not a judger, but you cannot sit here in my house about to eat dinner and be counting points on your phone when there are children around. Okay. We're just not doing it. So we came to our peace with that. Well, one day, I don't know what the situation was, why she didn't have her car, but I was the one that picked her up from Weight Watchers. And as we were driving home, I said, I'm just curious, what do you talk about there? What did you do? She said, well, today was about the holidays coming up. Today was about how are you, going to manage your eating over the holidays? And I said, well, the Jewish holidays are coming up, and I used to celebrate them with my husband, but he passed away this year. And so I called my daughter, and she said she would take care of it, and I could come over to her house every night of Hanukkah. And so she's going to fix dinner. And I realized as she's telling me this is just an old lady support group, right? She went and she shared her feelings in a way that maybe she doesn't share with her friends because she thinks she'll be a burden, or she doesn't share with me because she's worried she'll be a burden, right? This is her old lady widow support group. This has nothing to do with it, right? And so it's interesting that she felt safe doing that. But had I said, why don't you join a support group for bereaved widows? She would have had no interest in that. If I had said, why don't you consider seeing a grief counselor? No way she would have done that, right? But she'd go to Weight Watchers and talk about her feelings all day. So
Right.
it's sort of an acceptable sort of way of being among, women. And I'm sure there are men in Weight Watchers too, but we're talking specifically about women. And so it's one of those common languages that we have. And it's unfortunate that weight loss is a common language. Anti-aging is a common language, but it is, period. That's the place that we are in this culture.
Yeah, I don't see it going away anytime soon, even though I know we can talk about self-care and I mean, yes, all of it, but it's unfortunately still
Yeah. So we can at
awake and
least
alive.
work on it in our own sphere of influence.
Yes, exactly. But what if so your mom is a good example. I mean, she decided to go to Weight Watchers, and what if there are women who, because um, I see women who have been on and off diets their entire lives. They don't know
Hmm.
how to eat without
Yeah.
being on a diet. It's either you're on a
Hmm.
diet or you're off a diet.
Right.
Is there a diet that's good?
Okay. So the dilemma here is that, we all want to pay for an app that will just tell us what to eat, when to eat, right? How much to eat. But the truth is we have that app inside us. And that's again what we're trying to go back to. So, but it's not appropriate to say, oh, you've been on a diet your whole life, you've been completely detached from your own internal app. Well, just turn it on and go for it. That's not going to work. So the best bridge for that actually is a plan that's made specifically for you by a dietitian, because that's where, and again, I would recommend an eating disorder dietitian, even if you don't identify as having an eating disorder. You can say that I don't identify as having an eating disorder, but I've been on a diet all my life and I need someone to help me get from here to there, because it can be a years long process to get from listening to what other people tell you to eat to listening to your own internal cues. So in the meantime, it would be wise to listen to someone who has your best interests at heart, who has heard your story, who takes into account the things you like, right? The cabbage soup diet doesn't care if you don't like cabbage, right? But a dietitian cares if you don't like cabbage. And I'm sure in the work that you do as well, you take people's preferences into account. And so whether it's a dietitian, I'm using the term dietitian, but it could be you. It could be someone who has their best interests at heart. It could be a coach, a nutritionist, not someone who's going to try to sell you a bunch of supplements, but someone who's going to listen to your life situation and not tell you have to home cook meals if you like to eat out, right? Someone who's really going to hear what you say, and then to think of that as an experiment, because the thing is, every diet you've been on has taught you something, right? It may have taught you that you hate cabbage, right? But it's taught you something. Maybe it's taught you that you don't really need a Snickers bar at 3 o'clock every afternoon, right? Whatever it is, you've learned something. The hard part is sifting through the positives from the negatives. And that's why I think almost it very close to 100% of situations, you have to talk it through with someone else because you have to get out of your own mind. The other alternative is to write things down as you read a book or as you do a workbook or something that can help. But ultimately, I think the shortcut, if there is such a thing, is to talk it through with another person who can really help you sift through what is solvable with different ways of eating and what may be feelings or transitions or something else that may need a different kind of solution. I mean, how many diets can you go on to not go through menopause? Like, it doesn't work like that, right? How many diets can you do? How much weight can you lose till you overcome a crappy childhood? It doesn't work like that. And so a lot of times we're using food or dieting or weight loss or weight change or anti-aging as a way to sort of solve things that are not really solvable with food or dieting.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. I want to just ask you,
Yes.
just to please define what an eating disorder is, because we've been talking about eating disorders and
Yeah.
disordered eating, and I just for my audience, if you
Yeah.
could just give a brief definition of that, just so people are
Yes.
familiar with
Yes.
that.
The briefest of definitions is, do problems happen when you eat or don't eat? Like, that's the one liner. The way I think about eating disorders is I actually, in my work, I choose to use a different terminology and I use disruptive or dysfunctional eating behaviors because the problem I found with the term eating disorders is, like many things, we have this picture in our mind of who has an eating disorder. Like, we might see that emaciated person at a luncheon, and or something like that. We have that image of who has an eating disorder. And the truth is, anyone who eats can have disruptive eating behaviors. And so that's what we're looking at. And so disruptive eating behaviors can go on a wide spectrum from, very mildly annoying to life threatening. And so perhaps when they're life threatening, that's when we would traditionally think of eating behaviors as an eating disorder. But to me, anyone who's struggling deserves to get help. We don't have to label it, we don't have to put people in boxes. So I go back to that definition, that one liner, which is, do problems happen when you eat or don't eat?
What about orthorexia? Where
Sure.
I see women, they're eliminating dairy, they're not eating
Hmm.
gluten, they're, whole food groups get taken off the table.
Right. Right. And
Would you
so to
classify
me,
this in an eating disorder?
well, it only qualifies as orthorexia if it's impairing someone's quality of life. So, in other words, having food preferences is not an eating disorder. If someone is not eating dairy and not eating gluten and having a great life and their health parameters are good and they have energy and they feel good about themselves and they're content and they have a nice social life, great. That's not orthorexia. But at the point where someone is, let's say, not going to social functions with friends because they have to spend all weekend going to 10 different farmers markets to find all the specific foods that they want, right? Or at the point where someone is spending money they don't have on cold pressed juices, right? Or those kind of things. That is an impairment of functioning, even if their health may be fine. If their anxiety is so high that they can't go to a friend's birthday party because there might be gluten there, right? Those are the kind of things that I would say fall into that category of, do problems happen when you eat or don't eat? And so I have heard, you know, competitive stuff like, well, my cold pressed juice is in a glass bottle. I would never have cold pressed juice out of a plastic cup, right? Or I've heard of someone who dropped someone as a friend because they made a cake with an egg in it, right? I can't be around someone who would do such a thing, right? At that point, I feel like the individual may think, oh, this is working great for me, but if it's affecting their ability to be with others, et cetera, then to me that is an impairment of functioning. That would be problems happening around their.
Yeah, that sounds like so there's a lot of gray area like in this
Well, it's very
world.
personal. It's very personal. You can't just make a criteria and then ask people to either be in or out, right? Oh, like Heidi Klum, you're in or you're out, right? It's not like that. It can flex. So, for example, someone might be really interested in eating nutritiously, going to a farmer's market, blah blah blah. But then, under a time of stress, like let's say a relationship breakup or empty nest syndrome, it can kind of get a little bit out of control or obsessive because it's filling a need that's sort of a void in a different area of their life. So it's not that healthy eating is inappropriate, it's the obsession with it that's inappropriate.
And that then puts you in the category of a
Right,
certain disordered
right.
eating. Yeah. So I mean,
Exactly.
there's so many mixed messages out. I mean, every time I see a new diet, I'm like, this there cannot possibly be any more diets out there to have.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then
They're going to
there's
keep coming.
another,
They're going to keep coming, or they recycle old ones. Absolutely. Yes, 1000%. Yes. They're
yeah,
going to keep coming because they don't work. That's the dilemma, is that they don't work. And so there's always more people to sell a new diet. And what we do that is so, I think, counterintuitive. I don't understand why we do it. Instead of saying, yeah, that diet didn't work, we say, oh, yeah, I couldn't stay on it or something like that. Right. Or we say, oh, it worked. It totally worked. And then I gained all the weight back. Well, no, then it didn't work. But we were looking at it in like this very short term kind of way as it worked. I'm the problem. And that comes from that whole um, line of BS that we've been sold of not being good enough, like you said.
yeah, that you couldn't follow the rules.
Right.
You
Right.
couldn't keep up with it. It
Right.
becomes your fault.
Yes.
Well, there's so much to talk about in the world of eating and food and just making peace with your body. And I know, we talked about that this really does start in childhood with the messages you get
But
as
it's
kids.
never too late. It's never too late to start being curious
Yes.
about your own behaviors. It's never too late.
Yeah. And then that means getting more intuitive with your eating, right? Kind of trying to tune out the
Mhm.
messages
Mhm.
and just feeling okay about what you are doing, practicing self-care, knowing that you are
Yeah.
going through changes in your life,
Mhm.
that your body
And
is
take away the
shifting.
shame. No more shame. No more shame. Instead of being ashamed of what you've eaten or not eaten, think about it as regret. I regret that I ate that whole apple pie. What can I do differently so that that doesn't happen again? You know what? I need to consciously eat during the day so that I don't unconsciously eat during the night, right? It's just being curious, and it's okay to regret something and say, I enjoyed it at the time, but I feel kind of sick now, or whatever it is. But to not be judgmental about it, to be curious. I wonder why that happened. Right now, the idea of eating a whole apple pie sounds terrible. I wonder why I really wanted that early. What was missing in my day or what was missing in my life or in my mood that made me think eating a whole apple pie would fix it. I want to change the underlying thing, not the pie. Saying I'm never going to eat apple pie again is not the solution.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like cultivating some self-compassion and kindness for yourself, right? Just as
Yes.
you would talk to a friend, right? You want to do
Yes.
that with
Yes.
yourself.
Totally. Yes. And now I want apple pie. I'm hungry.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, Jessica, thank you so much. I mean, this has been a wealth of information, and I know you are just an expert at what you do. I have one last question. If someone does want to find a dietitian who specializes in eating disorders, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah. So there's actually an organization for eating disorder dietitians. It's called IFED, IFEDD. And so if someone were to email admin, like administrator, admin at ifedd.com, they will get Bianca. She is the administrator for that dietitian organization. And they can email Bianca and just say, I live in wherever, and I wonder if there's an eating disorder dietitian you could recommend near me.
Okay,
or
great.
that does telehealth if that's what you prefer.
Fantastic. I will put that in our show notes so people can have
Fabulous.
that link. And I will also link your book.
Oh yeah, food fairy tales. I'll
Yes,
give you a coupon code after we get off that you could put in the show notes. So that'll bring it down to $15 for anyone. It's an ebook and you can download it and see if there's, some of those exercises that you want to try to guide you into figuring out how to unravel and get back to that intuitive eater that you were when you were 3.
perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
My
And
pleasure.
have a great day.
Thank you.
And as always, if you loved this podcast, please consider gifting me with a 5-star review. It is so helpful for me to get the word out on real eating, our real bodies, and real food stories. Thank you so much and have a great week. Bye for now.